We're moving right along with episode 6 called Changing Gears of Transformers Generation 1 Season 2. So let's get into it. This is Energon Entries. Welcome back to Energon Entries, everybody. As always, this is your host, Matt Freites. I hope that this finds you well. I'm happy that you are here, and I hope that you enjoyed last episode. That was a breakdown of Enter the Nightbird. This week, we are moving on to episode 6 called Changing Gears. We hopefully will get some new character development here, so let's get right into the episode recap. The episode opens with the Decepticons attacking a gold mine, taking humans hostage to lure the Autobots into a trap. The circuit removal alters Gears' personality, making him overly helpful and easily manipulated. The Autobots launch a daring assault on the Solar Needle's jungle base, with Cliffjumper breaking through the force field. Despite being held at gunpoint, Optimus Prime cleverly convinces the altered Gears to disable the device, leading to a victorious counterattack. With the sun's instability escalating, Prime deactivates the needle and restores Gears to his original self. The episode ends with the Autobots returning to headquarters, leaving Gears to resume his usual grumbling. So this episode begins with humans coming out of a gold mine, finding gold. And the first thought that I had was, well, wasn't the gold rush like 100 years prior? The way that they were celebrating, it was very cliche. And it was also something that seemed a little bit odd for the 1980s. Like, I understand the old get-rich-quick scheme, but finding gold even back then, I mean, maybe it worked for the times. I don't remember exactly what the price of gold was back then. And yes, they had found a ton of it, but obviously it seemed a little bit archaic. And so the Decepticons in this case, they obviously find these humans because I assumed as we're watching this that they were looking for the gold because they were going to use the gold to make energy. This is pretty much what the Decepticons do every single episode. And so for them to not take that, but to take the humans as hostage, I thought that was fascinating because normally they don't do that. Normally, humans aren't even on their radar. Yes, they use them as human shields, but to capture them as hostages, it sort of tells me that Megatron is escalating his plans here. So I think it's interesting to see all of that and fascinating to see how Megatron's brain seems to be growing. Now, the opening scene where the Autobots respond to a distress call, again, we still see the OG Autobots. Some of them we haven't seen in a while though. Gears, Trailbreaker, Sunstreaker, just to name a few. So it is nice to see some somewhat fresh faces, but I can tell you that we don't see any of the Autobots that we saw in previous episode. I think that's now like 4 episodes ago. So despite the fact that Megatron was hoping that he would lure the Autobots with the human hostages, he still wasn't prepared for when the Autobots actually arrived. This is one of the rare times where the Autobots actually surprise the Decepticons, but of course they surprise them, can't overtake them. But every time Megatron uses the humans to distract the Autobots, I do think that this is very smart. And yes, it's escalating by making them hostages, but also I believe that using them at any time is smart because Optimus Prime is going to try to actually make sure that they're okay, and even if that's at the detriment of their goal. But during this little skirmish, Megatron uses his fusion cannon and energizes boulders with it, and in such a way that it allows them to come down and take out the Autobots, more specifically Optimus Prime. And it seems like the fusion cannon has a lot of tricks up its sleeve, doesn't it? Because we've seen a whole bunch of different things. Might have even been last episode or 2 episodes ago maybe, where it could shoot out some kind of like coolant gas or something. So the fusion cannon, while we are a little bit confused as to how powerful it is in terms of its primary use, it does have a lot of other uses, which I find fascinating. It's also interesting that Megatron would want Gears specifically. Now, they do sort of get into the fact that he has some chip inside him that seems to be tied to his personality that has some specific power or can sort of meet some specific need for this solar machine. I think it's called the Solar Needle. And by doing so, Gears becomes kind of nice. And that's fine. And it's just very specific. It's a very specific plan. And how did he know? I mean, I guess Megatron is able to use their computers to scan all the Autobots. but yet the Autobots with Teletran 1 can't seem to do anything like that. I don't understand how that works. Good for Megatron for having a computer that can actually do that. So the Decepticons have built, or Megatron has had them build this solar needle to suck the sun's power, and it's huge. Like, it's in this huge field, and I guess it's kind of implied that it's in this clearing that maybe is sort of away from society. But at the same time, it's taking up so much space, it's massive. And again, I kind of ask, like, how are the Autobots not able to see this? How are humans not able to see this? It's huge. So the Autobots had no idea this was happening. And I will say though, as I'm watching this, I mean, yes, I'm watching this making the assumption that I haven't seen it before. I have seen a lot of these episodes before, obviously, but this podcast is not taking place in a universe, my universe, in which I haven't seen any other content. So I've seen the Bayverse, and obviously this is where I think it's the plot from Revenge of the Fallen, which is the second of the Michael Bay movies, actually comes from. I mean, this is like a direct rip of it. And you know what? That's okay. It's okay that they're taking from Generation 1. I don't even know if it's canon, but that they're taking from Generation 1, because to me, so far, that is the best of the bunch. And so it's nice to see that there's a little bit of continuity there. So let's get back to this episode, where some of Megatron's plans here involve killing the Earth. And we've seen that a couple of times. And it involves killing the Earth, accidentally in some cases, with them on it. I've kind of always wondered how Megatron foresees all of this taking place. So let's take this episode, for instance. We have this solar needle sucking the energy out of the sun. What happens when they succeed? The Earth implodes or explodes, and it doesn't really matter whether they get all the energy or not. Is there a plan for them to get off the planet? Every time this happens, I always wonder, like, what is Megatron's fallback plan? Because it seems like he's going to do whatever it takes, no matter what happens to the Earth. But I don't know if he has thought through what would happen if these plans actually worked out, because they never do, and the Earth actually exploded. I have no idea. So we go back to Autobot base now, and I talked about Teletran 1 earlier. So Teletran 1, it knows that somebody is tapping into the sun. So they're sitting there at Autobot headquarters, and Teletran 1, which can't detect anything in the base, is like, oh, by the way, it looks like something is sucking the energy out of the sun. Well, if it was able to detect that, how the hell did it not detect the fact that this solar needle existed in the first place? I guess I just don't understand Teletran 1 in general, and maybe that's a drum that I beat a little bit too often, but for a smart supercomputer, it doesn't know a whole lot, in my opinion. And what you find out in this little scene here is that the Autobots have 2 Earth hours until the sun explodes. And the Autobots, of course, get this information, and they know that they have to stop the Decepticons. So naturally, what do? They're going to drive to wherever this machine is. Now, in this entire show, we know that there is not a lot of geographic continuity, as in we don't know how far things are away. We do know that supposedly the Transformers, the Autobots, the Decepticons are in the United States, and we have seen episodes where they've actually traveled out of the United States. Peru is a good example. So if they have 2 hours before the sun is going to explode and they're driving to wherever this is, are they actually going to be able to get there in 2 hours? And I know that we have to suspend disbelief and all that stuff, but it's just something I find hilarious and something that I think about a lot, because they drive almost everywhere. I think there's been one episode that they have actually flown anywhere, and that was Dinobot Island, but it took a jetpack. Haven't seen the jetpack since, and now we have them driving in. They need to get there in 2 hours, so it seems like there's not a lot of urgency, or there's not a lot of ability for them to actually have a sense of urgency. How about that? Gears and his friendly personality is kind of funny, because he's being obviously very nice without this chip, but I also love that he's being nice, but somewhere in his circuitry, he doesn't want to be nice. Like, he's aware that he should be acting differently toward the Decepticons, and I actually kind of like that. I also like that even though he has no control over his actions in a way, because he is so subservient, he knows how to get all that back, and he knows that that chip is there. So it kind of, in my opinion, sets the tone for a little bit later. Like, he's aware of this, and he just needs a little bit help to get there. So Starscream, once again, as always, is impulsive, and as always, nearly destroys the entire solar machine, thus nearly destroying all of the Decepticons' plans. And Megatron gets really upset, insinuates that he's going to do something to him, as in deactivate him, and guess what? Megatron keeps him around yet again, so that whole thing continues. And at some point, if Megatron is a good leader, he'll finally get rid of literally the worst Decepticon in the entire ranks who tries to take over at every turn. There was actually a voice quirk here, and it's a voice quirk on Optimus Prime. This is something that I don't think we've seen yet, and I'd be curious how often it actually happens, but Optimus Prime in this scene is very clearly speaking and very clearly had Ironhide's voice. Now, I don't know if Peter Cullen did both voices and they just used sort of a modulator on it, but Ironhide has a Texas voice. Peter Cullen doesn't have a voice nearly like that. So I find that interesting as their energy blasts were reflected back at them. Optimus Prime yelled something and it sounded like Ironhide. Don't see that too often. I actually kind of also like the idea of this alternate Texas Optimus Prime thing. That'd be a great secondary personality if they wanted to do a spin-off show of Prime just kind of rolling through and being a cowboy. I think that'd actually be kind of funny. So as we're going through this battle, Starscream confronts Gears as he's trying to take the chip back, and he speaks, and we hear, I think, either Skywarp's voice or Thundercracker. I couldn't make it out, but it's not Starscream's voice, so we kind of get two voice quirks there, and I just want to know how these make it through. The QC on the show is not very good, and maybe that's the point. But during all this again, the Autobots prove their loyalty and their sense of family is what sets them apart from the Decepticons, and I made that realization like 4 or 5 episodes ago. And they would rather save Optimus Prime than make sure that the mission succeeds. So they're there's this 2-hour time limit before the sun is going to explode. Optimus Prime is at gunpoint. They think he's going to die, so they want to make sure that they save him, and I love that. And even though the Autobots outnumber the Decepticons in this battle, at least by my eye it looked like that, it's not really how things worked out. They seem to get captured pretty easily for having the numbers advantage, so it is what it is. So we're at this point now where they have less than a minute to deactivate the solar machine, and Wheeljack and Ratchet are sitting there fighting about which wire to cut. Now, I understand that the stakes are high. I understand that they're two very smart robots, but at the same time, Jesus, you have 1 minute. And of course, like 5 minutes goes by, at least it seemed that way by the time Optimus Prime made a decision. And Optimus Prime is very smart, he's a leader, but a scientist he is not, so he just pulls the right wire, and it seems to work, so good for him. So the sun came so close to exploding. I have to ask though, there have to be consequences somewhere else on Earth, right? Because all these solar flares, everything that was happening, the gravitational pull of the Earth, everything had to just be thrown into this weird thing. I would think that actually the temperature would be something that would be different. And will we see some of those consequences in the next episode? We have seen them when they've been part of these like multi-part series, but I don't think we're going to see them in terms of singular episodes. So my guess is that the Earth will be just fine next episode. Overall, this episode seemed like it went really fast. It didn't seem like there was a lot to it. Obviously, the whole Gears thing is one thing. This whole solar needle thing is another. That just sort of came out of nowhere. This whole plan seemed like it came out of nowhere. This whole episode seemed like it came out of nowhere, and it seemed to end just as abruptly. It was nice to get some comic relief with Gears, of course, but overall, it was fine, it was forgettable, and I don't think that it's going to add too much to the Transformers canon or even this podcast as we go forward. If you've watched this episode and you liked it, didn't like it, I would love to know. Email the show, mattyicemedia@gmail.com. Wherever it is you listen to podcasts, if you can give a review, let me know what you like. Let me know what you don't like. I would love to hear from people who listen to this show. I want to thank everybody for tuning in every week, as always. I want to welcome the new people. Hopefully we continue to grow. It's not going to be the biggest podcast in the world, but if we can gain a little bit of a sense of community, I think that would be a lot of fun. I hope this finds everybody well. I hope this finds everybody safe, and I'll talk to everybody next time. This is Energon Entries. The opinions and viewpoints expressed on Energon Entries are those of Matt Freites and his guests, and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. Energon Entries is exclusively owned by Matt Freites and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.